We begin with the Fox News alert. Tonight, the president is back at the White House, but there is a Biden worldwide walkback happening after he appeared to call for a regime change in Russia. The White House is cleaning that up, along with many other remarks from his trip overseas. Check it out.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
We do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia or anywhere else for that matter.
Ukrainian people have a lot of backbone. They have a lot of guts. And I'm sure you're observing it, and you're going to see when you're there.
If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It would trigger a response in kind.
The United States has no intention of using chemical weapons, period, under any circumstances.
Meantime, Biden's approval hit the lowest in his presidency for one poll. According to a new NBC News poll, only 40% of Americans approve of the job Biden is doing, and a whopping 55% disapprove. So, Joey, here we are on day 2 after President Biden was supposed to be giving a speech about how the United States is not the aggressor here, and he gave Vladimir Putin that line of regime change, and now the White House is not just walking it back here in America, but of course around the world, given the high stakes of what was said.
You know, one of the most annoying things we say in network television, and we say it ad nauseam, is they said the quiet part out loud. You hear people say that all the time, and usually it's some inside the beltway where we know people think something, but they don't ever say it blatantly. And unfortunately, this is actually a case where Biden said the quiet part out loud. And the reason why it's quiet is it's strategically quiet. Of course, we'd love to see Vladimir Putin gone, but we're not going to serve up to him on a silver platter the idea that we're actively trying to get him gone. I took the same issue with Lindsey Graham, so I'm bipartisan in my critique here. This was just a dumb thing to say in what was a decent speech, a speech that he was going to get some pretty good accolades from. Certainly, there's a lot of hits about the lack of substance and the fact that you can talk tough all you want to, but if your actions don't back it up, it doesn't matter. But for the most part, word for word, it was a decent speech. And then he says something like that, and it trumps any other, call to action he might have made during that speech.
Yeah, the rest of the contents of the speech were not top of mind when it came to the Sunday shows this morning. Let's take a listen.
In the moment, I think that was a principled human reaction to the stories that he had heard that day.
The president, I think, is a straight shooter. He's deeply empathetic.
I think that the stated policy, as the White House has pointed out, has not changed. It is up to the Russian people to determine who is going to be in power in the Kremlin.
So, Jackie, are Democrats trying to walk that back in addition to the White House? Is that going to be enough for President Putin not to think that Joe Biden meant what he said?
Well, it depends who you ask, Katie, right? So if you ask the Democrats, they're saying this is fine. It's perfectly okay to go up there and misspeak or give away strategy or say things that you're not supposed to. Look, the trip overall, essentially, for the president was a fail, right? And when he is not on script, he makes loads of mistakes. We went over them yesterday. We're going to continue to go over them today. And really, when you look at what he's done with respect to the approach here in general, I go back to before this started. They said they were going to work on diplomacy. They said they were going to do things to prevent this. They waited on sanctions. There was no diplomacy. There were no conversations. The fact that we're a month into this now and it takes bloodshed to try to, get people to move a little bit here, to me, it is absolutely amazing. And then you've got people on the Sunday show sitting there and defending him after he comes out and makes a statement like that. Everybody needs to get on the same page here. To me, it's completely unacceptable, but not surprising from this president who was making mistakes way into the, in the debates before he was elected. This is what people voted for. Now you have it.
Yeah, you mentioned a number of people defending the president, but shockingly, a number of people in the mainstream media are admitting that this may have been a mistake by the president.
When you're calling for regime change in a nuclear state, that's a policy that you might want to think through before you do it.
Whether or not U.S. foreign policy will officially reflect that remains to be seen. Something like calling for regime change or even just suggesting the notion of regime change has a lot of landmines.
You know, Leo, we talked about yesterday how the president has repeatedly said that his goal is not to get us into World War III, but he may just stumble us into it as a result of the things that he decides to say off the cuff. And we've also heard from the president that we are dealing with a nuclear-armed country, which is why we have to be very careful about how we arm the Ukrainians, what that perception might be, how Vladimir Putin would take that. And yet here we are with the president saying the regime change on a country that has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world.
You know, Katie, I'm glad you asked that question, because being a history teacher, you learn from history. When leaders historically made foolish statements, ad lib, like what you heard from Joe Biden, calling about regime change, that leads people into wars. Foolish statements, ad lib statements. We don't know, Katie, if he made that consciously or it was just a slip of the tongue. The bottom line is you're dealing with a madman in Putin who's angry, not happy with the way the war is going. You're backing him up into a cage and looking for an excuse. What better excuse is to use the words of Joe Biden talking about eliminating him to justify further escalation of the war? History has taught us that diplomacy is very important, and what Joey said earlier, you don't make a foolish statement like the one that Joe Biden made. He did, and now we have to be very, very careful. Thank goodness the White House walked that statement back. And hopefully, people who put country first instead of party loyalty will also criticize President Biden and make sure that statement will never be uttered again, at least overtly.
Yeah, and the stakes are really high. And of course, President Biden said that if Russia were to use chemical weapons, we would respond as the United States in kind. You have Senator Marco Rubio talking about how he thinks Russia will proceed with their attacks in Ukraine. Take a listen.
I think the likeliest thing you're going to see from Putin is trying to use chemical or biological weapons, for that matter, but doing it in a way that makes it look like someone else did it. So that's his history. I don't think he would himself admit that he's using these chemical weapons. I think he would want to blame that on Ukraine or NATO and say that it was them who did it.
So, Joey, you know, this is the State Department and the administration has been warning about Russia possibly doing some kind of false flag operation, using chemical weapons. We know that chemical weapons have been used in Syria, where, of course, Russia has been for many years now. What are your thoughts now as we proceed with these gaffes being cleaned up and what the impression that the Russians have of the United States and what they might do? And more importantly, you know, for me, looking back on what happened in Syria with the Obama administration while Joe Biden was vice president, Russia has a tendency to call bluffs, and they did so under the Obama administration. And is there a danger here of them calling the bluff of Joe Biden and him not responding in the way that he has claimed that he would?
No, absolutely. I mean, what we're talking about now is posturing. It's a defensive strategy. It's a part of why we do exercise in certain places at certain times, not just a show of force, but to show a readiness. And Joe Biden kind of failed us on that. And I'm not just trying to beat up on Joe Biden. At the end of the day, I'll be honest with you, I don't trust this administration to get us into and back out of a conflict, a direct conflict with Russia. And for that reason, I've not supported us escalating the planes or anything to send into Ukraine that will get us in direct conflict, because I don't trust the administration to pull us back out. Whether or not Russia uses chemical weapons, I don't know that they're a strategic advantage right now. I don't think they're necessary. They have a tremendous amount of conventional weapons they're already using and are being used on civilians. I don't know that chemical weapons really puts Putin in a better spot unless he really is backed into a corner and feels like he can't get a win out of this. I think those like Macron are trying to find that win for him, so this will stop. And it's my hope that that becomes the end of this very quickly. As far as Joe Biden goes, he doesn't have it to get into something like this and get us back out. And for that reason, he's almost doing the right thing for the wrong reasons right now, which is basically sitting on his laurels and not, at least publicly, doing more. I think the biggest concern with him making these gaffes is that Putin can go and say, you know, those 1,000 protesters? Yeah, that's covert operations by the West. They've put people here to do that, and we need to punish them. And that's the kind of ammunition you give Putin when you say things like that. Words are important, and they're deliberate, and they're a part of posturing, and we're failing at that right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.